Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healthtech Pigeon, dissecting...
We're not dissecting pigeons, just to be clear.
Wonder where I was going with that sentence. Not dissecting any pigeons. We are discussing the latest Healthtech news, so you don't have to. I'm Amy Thomas, and with me I am joined by SomX's Jessica and SomX's Holly. Hello, both of you.
Hi.
Hello.
And just to be clear, dissecting works because you can dissect the news. We just need to be really clear that no animals are harmed in the making of this podcast.
Thanks for that clarification, Jessica. And yes, we can obviously agree that no animals were harmed. But we will be dissecting the news, and we'll be quite happily dissecting the news for you guys today. So yes, as always, lots of stories to talk about. But before we get in, how are you both? How have your weeks been?
I don't want to say it's been a busy week because I say it's been a busy week every week. It's been a hot week. So let's talk about the weather because obviously British, that's what we do best. It's been hot. There's been some epic thunder and lightning. A solid torrential downpour. I feel like as all good news programs do, it's important that probably we have this weather update in there early on. Maybe that's something we need to factor into the weekly pigeon update, which is a forward look at the temperatures and the weather and how that's influencing maybe health tech investment. Who knows?
You know what? I think there is a link there. I think we could incorporate them. I mean, we always end up talking about the weather anyway, so we might as well include it as an official segment. Holly, what about you? How is your temperature? What are you forecasting for the weather ahead?
I was going to say my initial thought was to jump straight to how the weather's been in London this week, but I think we've covered that. It's been a hot one, but you guys have fans, so you're doing okay. I'm sitting here sweltering.
Yes, although I had to switch it off for this recording, so let's hope we survive.
Dedication for the fans.
Absolutely. Well, let's, without further ado, get into the latest stories. Let's go into our first story of this week, which is from Kate Lawrence at Tech EU. Beyond the AI buzz, Nina Capital's critical view on the health tech hype. So Nina Capital speaks to Kate about the falling for the AI gold rush. Instead, they're backing diverse founders solving real healthcare problems. Essentially, what's discussed here is really, really interesting, and look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts on this as well, is something that we often talk about in Pigeon is around AI hype or reality. And this view, which is from the investment perspective, really captures that very nicely. Essentially, what they've found is that half of the companies that are pitched to their firm, which is based in Barcelona, is claim that they use AI. So the bulk of the emails that they get are they say it's actually either written by AI or about AI. And in screening around 1,000 health tech companies, around half of them claim that they use AI in their tools somehow. And the article goes on to explain that actually questioning that use of AI and whether it's something that is being overclaimed in the products that are being put forward, and essentially outlining those risks. So often what people are describing as AI is in fact just standard software and shouldn't be used under that term. And an interesting point that came out of this is, in fact, some of the solutions that aren't AI, that are those more boring software programs and solutions, are in fact the most effective, and that we shouldn't be focusing just on the glossy, shiniest, most inviting or engaging AI innovations, and that we really have to look at the scale of the problem from the problem that it's solving rather than the actual technology that's coming into it. So hopefully that explained it in some detail, but really interested to delve into this a little bit more with you, Jessica and Holly, around what do we think around the way that AI is articulated and used, especially in the investment community, and how do we actually sift out companies that are actually using really advanced AI versus companies that aren't, and perhaps making sure that we still retain a focus on software and programs that are perhaps more understated, but in fact very, very beneficial for solving real world healthcare problems. So, any thoughts from either of you to jump in on that?
Well, first of all, I think it's a brilliant build from our episode last week titled Regulation is Sexy, because the TLDR on this one is that actually it's the unsexy software that actually stands to potentially have the biggest impact. And, you know, it's smart and it solves the right solution, or it's smart and it provides the right solution to the right problem. And I think that is probably quite a neat summary of what you were saying there. I guess the other thing is, if they've got software that's able to identify the emails that are written by AI, I want that software. Nina Capital, I need to know. Being able to, I mean, I often see things land in my inbox, and also a mock on LinkedIn, which are just so obviously written by AI, and maybe, you know, who cares? But I kind of just want to know. It would just be really validating, and I could be like, that's my AI radar pinging, and it's right. So whatever software they're using, I want it. And I think I have to say, I sympathize with innovators because, as this article rightly points out, a lot of investors have got overly excited by use of the term AI. And we often have this discussion about, what does AI even mean anymore, which is why you end up with what they've described as little more than old-fashioned code, all the way through to generative AI, LLMs, and that kind of thing, all coming under that same label, but being so vastly different and working in such vastly different ways. It's like chalk and cheese, yet it's classed as AI. And I've heard and been part of conversations myself where, you know, founders and innovators, everyone's trying to raise money right now and everyone's trying to get investors' attention. And I think because AI has captured the attention, everyone's trying to figure out how do they leverage that to try and catch the eye of the investor. And I don't think it's about trying to dupe investors or anybody else, frankly. I think it's because, ironically, it's being seen as a way to stand out, even though it's making them blend in a bit more. And the article later goes on to say it compares what we're seeing now to the dot-com bubble, which we know burst, and that was also fueled by that overexcitement and therefore overinvestment. And we have 100% seen the same thing in Healthtech, in healthcare, since COVID. And I think where we are now is the other side of that bubble bursting, and the reality setting in alongside then. So that, I guess, like, some of the excitement being tempered, but then we've got new technology coming out which people are getting really excited about and seeing brilliant use cases for. But actually, coming back full circle, is it solving problems that need to be solved in the right way? I had this discussion quite recently on a different podcast. It was the Motherhood Clinic podcast, where we were talking about health tech and women's health as well. And it's the same thing. Like, everyone's trying to get the attention of the right people, and AI has, in some cases, been seen as a lever to do that. But I don't think we have a ubiquitous understanding of what we define as AI. So it's used very liberally, in the same way we use innovation to an extent. So my sympathies, as I say, are with innovators, because just want to get a bit of attention. You know, they want to catch the eye, and I get it, because that's where lots of investors, and not Nina Capital, but that's where lots of investors are looking, because it feels like it's really hot, so they want to be jumping on it.
Yeah, and Holly, we'll love to hear your thoughts, but just wanted to add, on the back of this, I did actually look up the definition, like the most recent definitions of AI, just on the back of this article, to see, what are we defining as that, given that this article claims that people are claiming AI when it's not AI. So what actually is AI? And the recent definitions I found were so broad. I mean, NASA defines it as systems that perform complex tasks that involve reasoning, creativity and decision making. Oxford,
aka the human brain.
yeah. Oxford, the theory and practice of developing systems that simulate human intelligence. Google, technology is enabling machines to mimic human cognitive functions. So it's broad. I think you could, like, if you were going along those lines. So maybe there's a kind of disconnect between what we define as AI in one world versus the investment world, and how we kind of navigate that discourse. Because you're right, you don't want innovators to lose out by saying it's just a mathematical model, and not get that attention. But at the same time, we don't want to overclaim. So yeah, Holly, interested to hear your perspective on this too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very interesting point you guys raised around the this idea that AI is being used by innovators to kind of help them stand out for the crowd. And I think for me, I've got a slightly different take on this. When I was kind of reading through it, I think with this, for me, sort of the onus then sort of sits with investors. Like, reading through this, I was like, I think it says further down the where is it, article sort of saying that maybe we've got to a point where with AI we're trying to kind of fit AI into a problem and use it to solve sort of any challenge, whether that's healthcare, other industries. And I think partially, yes, that's to do with the hype, but for me, sort of 101 of health tech innovation is that you start with the problem and then you find the most suitable solution, whether that is technology, whether it's software, AI, etc., to help sort of meet that challenge. And I think for me, sort of when it comes to this and sort of figuring out how we move past these challenges, is the onus then lies with the investor on the foundation of investment is, have they got good clinical data? Is there evidence to back up the claims that they're making? Etc., etc. So for me, that was sort of my initial take. But I think, the point you guys raised about when it comes to AI, actually, how do we define it? Very, I guess, quite open question, should we say?
No, I love that point about the responsibility on doing the due diligence. That's part of the reason why they exist, right? To kind of figure out which are the companies that are going to be moving the needle. And I guess the question, the difficulties are in the terminology, right? And I guess the question raised here is about how do we differentiate that and just not make it a more difficult job for them when everybody's claiming AI. But yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
I think, as you already say, there's no real consensus on the definition of AI. It's still very broad. And so when you look at that from a scientific perspective, if you were to look at a scientific paper, often you have to be really clear about definitions and putting very clear parameters around things. And I think with AI, we're just not able to do that. We have to drill down even further into what is the technology actually doing and how is it actually doing it. And I think that's part of what they're saying here, which is that describe it, rather than just describing the AI or describing something as AI, get real clarity on actually what the tech is doing and how. it feels like AI is a lazy term, I guess, in that perspective. And I understand that people don't want to get too technical either, because that gets confusing for people. And no one likes to feel stupid as well. I don't want to have words put in front of me that I don't understand. That doesn't make me feel good, and investors definitely don't want to feel that way. And Holly, what you were saying there about, like, you know, starting with a problem, you're right, that for sure is 101. I think part of the challenge is tempering people's excitement, because there has been so many amazing technologies where you're like, well, if it can do that, then surely we can do X, Y, and Z. And, you know, isn't it amazing that it can already do this? We must be able to find ways that we can use it to, you know, make efficiencies in healthcare or provide better care or whatever it might be. And so it often does feel like the cart is put before the horse in that respect, because, you know, ChatGPT 5 has come out, and it's been very bashed, obviously. But, you know, I've already seen people talking about what does that mean for healthcare, because there's a healthcare element to it and all of those kinds of things, rather than, you know, the other way around. And interestingly, there is an entire conference that is actually built around talking about the problems, led by the BMJ, which I think again is super interesting, because the BMJ are known and renowned for their evidence base at the point of clinical practice, particularly, and the fact that it's being held by them, and they're creating space for clinicians and people who are at the center of those problems to come and share those problems and talk about their challenges in a very tangible and quite confronting way, I think is a really interesting approach. We don't often see that, and that, I think, then provides innovators and investors, by the way, and probably policymakers too, but I think potentially a different topic, to hear it straight from the people who experience those problems, to then be able to identify the opportunities and then come up with solutions that can genuinely fix those problems. And I don't think many of those spaces exist. I think what we often find is, you know, some anecdotal data, and people's experiences where it signals that there might be a problem, a great idea how technology can solve it. And it's not till further down the line that you actually do that validation piece, until, you know, you've got the MVP and all of those kinds of things. And particularly, you know, I imagine that happens a lot more where you don't necessarily have a clinician as part of a founding team and all of that kind of thing. It's harder to get those insights. So I think it's really interesting that we're now seeing these spaces being created by the organizations who are the institutions for generating evidence, to make sure that we are creating problems that solve real life clinical problems, and whether that's at, you know, system level, that's not necessarily patient facing or even clinician facing. You know, as they say in this article, unsexy software sometimes is the biggest game changer. It doesn't have to be a shiny app that, you know, a patient is using, or even a clinician is using, or a sparkly dashboard. It's sometimes the unsexy, obvious things that make the biggest difference. So I'm excited to see what more comes out of that, and how, investors and innovators can engage in opportunities like that to really unpick it, and therefore appraise the opportunity and the potential for it.
Yeah, and very encouraging that articles like this and the BMJ event are bringing this to light, and just reminding people to that it doesn't have to be that kind of shiny gadget, and that people are really looking for solutions to the real problems. Well, thank you both. I think that leads very nicely onto our next story. So let's move on to our second story this week. Which is somewhat linked, and actually interesting on the back of talking about real world problems and AI, looking at a company called Thriver, who are using AI, but also using AI in combination with clinically validated guidance for people. So Thriver have released a survey which has indicated that 9 out of 10 people in the UK, based on their customer base, changed their lifestyle after a clinically guided at-home blood test. So Thriver are an at-home blood testing company where the kit is sent to people. You do the test at home, you send the sample off, the sample is analysed in a lab, and users receive a personalised GP report. On the back of that, their recent data shows that people actively made changes to their lifestyle on the back of the recommendations. So as well as 9 in 10 making one lifestyle change, they actually had more granular detail around the changes that were made. 57% of people started taking new vitamins or supplements. Around 56 people made dietary changes, so eating more fruit or veg, cutting sugar, that kind of thing. Around 30% increasing their strength training, and various other factors like sleep routines and stress management techniques. So all quite an array of quite personal lifestyle changes that really lends itself to the prevention messages that have been put forward in the NHS long-term plan. And what this story highlights is some very interesting points which I would love to discuss with you both. One is about true prevention and how we can give people access to medical tools. The second point is around clinical validation, and on the back of some other news that was released by the BMJ, a couple of studies done by the University of Birmingham actually slated point of care, what they call point of care testing, but what they mean is shop bought tests for rapid health tests that can include blood tests as well. They actually slated the accuracy of these tests. So the second point is about accuracy. And then the third point is around, I guess, that empowerment piece of, how valuable is this kind of tech when we're combining AI, personalized insights with clinical validation, and how beneficial can that be to patients, and are there any risks? So yeah, open to the floor to you guys. Thoughts on the survey? What does this data reveal, and what are your initial reactions to this?
I just want to interrogate a little bit the difference between these kinds of tests, because it's interesting that those tests that can be picked up in a shop are called point of care tests. I wouldn't have considered Tesco or Superdrug, where you can buy them, to be at point of care. But then, you could argue otherwise, because, there are pharmacies in both shops, or the Superdrug obviously is a pharmacy, and you can get healthcare services in your pharmacy. And in actual fact, if a lot more of us access healthcare services in our local pharmacies, then it would relieve a little bit of the pressure on primary care. But I have walked past those kinds of tests a few times, and they looked to me a bit like a COVID test that I would pick up. Although, does anyone even test for COVID anymore? Who knows?
I actually did one last week.
Oh, good for you. I do have a pile I have a pile at home from the last time I had it, which was October last year. Well, that was the last time I tested anyway. And they were sold out at the time because there was a new variant going around and everyone had COVID. It sounds like we might be in another time like that. Anyway, I digress. But I walked past these tests and I noticed that it was for things like menopause and UTIs and all of those kinds of things, which I didn't realize that you could pick up something like that in a shop, just off the shelf. And it made me want, because usually if I thought I had a UTI, I would go to the GP and I would give a urine sample and they would do a tip test or something like that, and then I'd get antibiotics. Or I'd drop off a urine sample and then they'd ring me and prescribe me antibiotics. And it made me think, like, how accurate are they? And how does it work in practice? Because there's no clinical input there, which also why it baffles me, like a point of care test. So you're providing some kind of saliva, urine, even blood sample, and then you're getting results there and then, much like a pregnancy test, I guess. So how accurate is that, and how helpful is it? And I think all these kinds of out of clinic tests, let's call them, whether it's something that Thrive are generating or developing and providing, or it's an off-the-shelf product, are often criticized for driving more people into health systems and health services where they're getting false positives or they don't understand their results and all of that kind of thing. And I know that there is definitely a distinction between what I pick up in Superdrug and what I'm able to get from the likes of Thrive or Healthtech or something, where, you know, I've asked for a full hormonal profile. I can see that there's some, you know, AI, for want of a better word, involved in that process where, you know, I've gone online, I've explained why I want to do the test, and I've taken a questionnaire, and by that, from that information is then made a recommendation and delivered a certain type of test to me. What I like is that my results have been reviewed by a clinician, but that seems to me to be the main difference. But I guess it's often the boundaries blurred, and the regulations, I think, are a tricky piece here for me, because how reliable is one versus the other, and are they on par from a regulatory perspective, given that both of them arguably are providing someone with personalized health information based on a biomarker?
Well, actually, the answer is they're not on par, because many of the tests reviewed in the BMJ article failed to meet some of the regulations. And Thriver, for example, did react to this and said that they complied with the highest of standards. So they're obviously calling for greater regulation across the sector, because, as you mentioned, there are risks of not following the regulation, which are not just giving a false positive or a false result, but could actually lead to some real damage if people are then taking medications or treatments or actually acting on the results that are inaccurate. So regulations is a key part of this, and I think people were worried, you know, but that's this story got covered everywhere in the nationals, and I think because it's that trust that you place in companies to provide these seemingly useful services, and then when that comes under the spotlight, under the scrutiny, and it's revealed that perhaps it isn't as tight and regulated as you would hope, it just raises so many questions about trust. And then I think but then on the flip side, we shouldn't disregard the value in home health tests that can support people in giving them more information. And the key point of differentiation is that wraparound care part, whether it's through AI or through, well, combination of AI or mainly through clinical guidance. It's the added information that people were calling for, saying, okay, well, we've done this test, but there's no information on what to do with the results. And then they might be acting on them, not actually having the expertise into what treatments or what solutions they can take. So yeah, there's a kind of caution around let's assess this from a health tech perspective, from a prevention perspective of we we shouldn't disregard these kind of tests as a valuable tool, but they have to be regulated and they have to be useful. Otherwise, it's leading people down the wrong track and actually potentially causing harm. So yes, quite a few questions to delve into.
I feel like the manufacturers of those point of care tests probably need to listen to last week's episode, because as we all learn, regulation, especially in healthcare, is sexy.
Let's say it again.
Louder for the people at the back.
Let's hear it again. No, it's you're absolutely right, and it's not. Yeah.
Sorry, there is nothing to repeat.
Thank you for your input, Siri.
Thank you, Siri, for that input. But yeah, it's absolutely is something that they must consider. Holly, what are you thinking?
I think for me, do you know what? It was just reminding me when I remember when these, what they're calling point of care tests came out, and I remember seeing them in Boots and Superdrug for the first time and thinking, oh, well, that's cool, but like, I wonder how on earth that works. Like you sort of, I think for me, like if there was an issue, as it says in the article, you go to your GP would do the test, you get the result, you chat it through with the clinician, and then whatever sort of intervention was required thereafter, would happen. But I think with these, I was sort of like, it leaves you to wonder, which I guess with these is, are they ending up just duplicating sort of, I guess, work for, GPs? Say, for example, if these aren't as, if they're not as accurate as sort of standard tests, people are going in, getting these results, then there's no sort of clinical intervention. They're wondering, okay, well, what does this mean for me? So then they're going to the GP. Is the GP then redoing those tests, to then sort of, I guess, have that data themselves, off the back of this, the reports that came out. So I think they certainly, in a regulated space have a place, but I think it just, for me, that called a clinical intervention spokesperson is critical. I know when I looked at it, I was like, well, I could do it, but like, so what? What does that then mean? Like, you'd want to talk to someone. Could you take it to your pharmacist and discuss it with them? Or for a GP, as I said, like, how would I haven't been as close to this, but like, how would a GP perceive that information?
They dipstick you. They dipstick you. They do a dip test. They do a dip test of their own, because they need to follow their clinical guidance to be able to make sure that the result is as accurate as it can be and it should be, so that their advice that they're giving you and their treatment that they're giving you is accurate. And I think let's not forget that if you take a UTI, for example, UTIs are treated with antibiotics. We are seeing AMR, antimicrobial resistance, as one of the biggest global crises going, and people are talking about that becoming the next pandemic, where we have an antibiotic resistant illness that spreads like wildfire. And then what do we do, because we can't treat it with antibiotics? And so I think, even if we're talking about something as simple as a UTI, which we know can be quite serious, clinicians have to do that, because prescribing of antibiotics is contentious at the best of times, and they have to be sure that they're prescribing it appropriately. So they can't just go off the back of somebody else's test. But I don't know. I don't know whether that's the point, though, in as much as, I guess, thinking about prevention maybe, but just like how people address their health, which is that the point is that if you were to get a positive result, you then go to the healthcare professional, and then you go into the system, and then you go through that process as normal. And if you don't get the positive result, you don't do that. So I think I think the clinicians would still go through that process. They're not going to take the result that you've received. They'll check it for you. Even if you're pregnant, if you've taken a pregnancy test, probably by that point you've taken 10. And then they will also do a urine sample and a test to make sure that you're pregnant again there. So it's not that, it cancels out one or the other.
Sort of like a prerequisite.
But I
mean, I still, even though the study, the original BMJ study, it shed a lot of light on quite negative light on this, I still think that it's positive that we're attempting to give people that power. And I think we still need to regard these kind of tests as something that can be a useful tool. And it's just about addressing the points that were made around information and accuracy. And then on the flip side, it's companies like Thriver, like when we're talking about testing and diagnosing, that's actually not what companies like Thriver are about. In fact, these results that have come out around the lifestyle is to actually try and explain that it's a sort of it's a layer above that of information before the point of even needing to have a blood test, in that you are continuously checking and monitoring and keeping an eye on how is my blood, how are the levels, how are my biomarkers in this regard. And it's that continuous monitoring, which isn't just a one-off random test that may or may not give you useful insights. And it's actually an entirely different thing that we're talking about here. And the survey results that have come out to show that actually on the back of this at-home blood testing, which people can do really easily, send to a lab, people are actively making changes to their lives, which is not an easy thing to achieve. And when we talk about behavioural economics and health economics of really trying to find those motivations, we often talk about large-scale public health campaigns when we looked at smoking habits and with obesity and addressing stigmas and things like that. I think this is sort of in the same camp as that. It's like we're giving people, it's about psychology, it's about motivation, and it's about it's almost I don't want to say it's less about healthcare, but that's like it's sort of on that more human side of it.
Healthcare rather than sick care, though, isn't it? And I think that's the thing, and that's the big shift that everyone is talking about towards the preventative piece, which is that let's tackle our good health and optimize our good health before it gets to the point of sick care. And I think that's a really interesting distinction, because a lot of these point of care tests people are taking perhaps at the point where they're experiencing an issue. And yes, you could take a test like Thriver if you had symptoms of something, but it sounds to me like this is the kind of thing that you would do on a regular basis, and it gives you a panel of results that you can track and keep an eye on. And you might do it because, not necessarily because, I think I might have a UTI, but it might be just that, well, I'm not recovering as well as I used to when I do my, twice a week 5K run, or I'm just feeling a bit more tired and lethargic at the moment, not to the extent where I think I'm unwell, but I think that there's probably things that I can do that could boost my energy, and knowing and understanding what my body's doing can inform how I make that better, and stop it getting any worse, certainly. And if I think about myself, I take lots of supplements, and lots of people have iron deficiency, for example, for lots of different reasons, whether it's because you are pregnant or you've given birth, or my nan has iron deficiency. I don't actually know why, but she's not very well for lots of different reasons. But people for different reasons have iron deficiency. And if you're able to see that you did have iron deficiency, and then you have that clinical input of, okay, well, your iron is a bit low, so maybe try taking a supplement with this formulation for this period of time and see how you feel. That would be great. And even things like creatine. Creatine is a big conversation on my algorithms at the moment, and there's a lot of evidence for why it's beneficial for women. It's beneficial for your neurological care, and can potentially help stave off the symptoms of neurological conditions later in life. But the optimal dose is between 5 and 10 grams. Now, how on earth do I know whether to take 5 grams or 10 grams or 7.5 grams? So maybe if I did a test like Thriver, that's going to give me a more personalized, and I don't know if this is the case, by the way, but tests like that can give me a much more personalized view into, okay, well, I know I want to take creatine for these reasons, for preventative reasons, but it might just give me an indication of as to where I sit on that spectrum, how I could do the best thing for my health, rather than, oh, well, I know I should take vitamin D because it's good for me and good for my immune system. It's, well, James, for example, like, he needs to take way more vitamin D than I do, but there is a average standard that people are recommended to take in terms of the volume of vitamin D. Well, he needs way more than that. I probably need about average. So by doing that test, obviously there's risk factors which can, give indicators, but by doing that test, we can take a way more data-driven approach and personalized approach to it. And I know how often I need to reorder my subscription so that we've got enough for me and for James at both our optimum levels. So I definitely see where that kind of thing can really play to people's advantage as these conversations about healthcare and prevention, we're even sliding into well-being, because I actually don't know where the definitive line is, how that works, but influences then sick care on the other side of things too.
Yeah, well-being sliding into longevity, sliding into health span. There's a lot in that area, but I think it's great to talk about that, as we said, in the realms of sick care versus healthcare, and the way that we are approaching health is changing and has been for a very long time. I remember my first job after uni, working at NICE, and we did loads of work on health prevention, and it was all about personalised healthcare and health prevention. And that was quite a few years ago now. But the difference now is the technology that is allowing that to happen at a real kind of accessible scale, which makes it, actually exciting and a reality. So I think it's exciting. I get excited by it because it's a different way of approaching health. The layer before, and giving people that information, that it's not always the doctors withholding, but we're not disregarding the clinical expertise that's required. So yeah, it's an exciting time, I think, and the BMJ study on the rapid tests definitely raises questions that need to be answered, but I think there's an important counter narrative that we're well placed to bring up, and we're working closely with these kind of companies that are need to not be in the same camp as that, because what they're doing is very, very different. So yeah.
Excuse me, I just run off to order my Thriver test so I know what supplements I should be taking when.
Exactly
right
that. Exactly that. So yes. Well, I think we have covered quite extensively the ideas around prevention, and I think that draws the conversation to actually a quite a nice close. So yeah, any final thoughts, Holly, from you on the Thriver?
Sorry, I lost you guys.
Will you be
there?
ordering your kit?
Yeah, I've got the website open. It's telling me to build my test, so maybe we'll see. We'll give it a go. We'll report back.
You go use that AI.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for the discussion. As always, always interesting to hear from you guys on the latest health tech news. And here at Health Tech Pigeon, we're always ready to discuss and dissect, as we have adequately done.
News, but not pigeons.
Exactly that. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And as always, you can find our full stories and all of our content on healthtechpigeon.com, as well as on socials. Follow us, share us with your friends, family. Everybody loves a podcast. So thank you for listening. And yeah, we'll see you next time.